Will this be any better? I can already see I can comment on here. Or I could. Now it disappeared. So dumb. What is this thing's problem? Alright, so Jax West from Stephen Avery Project, Justice with Jax, MAM Gossip. We started part 4 today of Wrecking Crew, but I guess Facebook keeps freezing, and so I thought I would start a new thread to see if that would be better. Go. All right. So we are now on chapter 19, titled Second Try. This is page 190 out of 361. David and Natalie are back. All right, so here we go. Hopefully this is better. One of the most highly suspicious evidence finds to turn up in the Avery murder case did not result when the independent team of highly trained forensic examiners from the Wisconsin State Crime Laboratory in Madison had their opportunity to inspect, from top to bottom, the interior and exterior of the RAV4. Oh, well, at least somebody got the opportunity. At that period, the car was kept within the confines of their indoor garage, away from any outside interference or skullduggery. But the Calumet County Sheriff's Office was itching to regain control of Teresa's motor vehicle. Sheriff Jerry Poggle, and now I see it says it's interrupted again. So I guess just try and bear with me today. This is being stupid. And investigator Mark Wiegert wanted her SUV back in their property under their safeguards sooner rather than later. Only 2 days after Avery's arrest, Calumet Corporal Chris Wendorf and Lieutenant John Barnes were sent to retrieve a pair of vehicles from Madison. The two summoned Brian Roaring and Dan Bangart, who operated Scott's Towing and Dan's Towing, both in Chilton. The two vehicles retrieved on November 11, 2005, were described in police reports as a blue four-door Toyota RAV4 and a 1993 Pontiac Grand Am. Quote, the Toyota RAV4 was loaded on the Scott's Towing flatbed along the hood of the Rambler, strapped to the flatbed underneath the Toyota RAV4. Also given to me by Lucy Meyer was a key the Wisconsin State Crime Lab had made in order to enter the Toyota RAV4 vehicle, as the original vehicle key had not been located at the time they had received the vehicle, unquote, Wendorf said. Quote, also, I had delivered an envelope addressed to the Wisconsin State Crime Lab that had been given to me by Deputy Jeremy Hawkins that did contain evidence with a buccal swab from Stephen Avery and palm and print cards from Charles Avery, Earl Avery, and Bobby Dassey, the killer. The police entourage left Madison at 1:30 p.m. and made it back to Chilton, their little county seat, at 3:40 p.m. The RAV4 was moved into Unit 7 of the Chilton storage units off Mary Avenue. Quote, I then did tape the vehicle doors with evidence tape and initial, date, and timestamp each evidence tape, unquote, Wendorf said. Quote, the unit was then closed and locked with a fresh, brand new master lock key lock that had been removed from its packaging. Evidence bags and property tags, along with evidence, were deposited in locker 1 of the storage area to wait the property custodian for proper logging, unquote. No credible evidence surfaced that Avery ever threw away his bed mattress and box springs, which were surely drenched and saturated with Teresa's blood if the gory killing happened the way Sweaty Sweat Sweat described her death during his wild press conference on March 2, 2006. But on April 3, 2006, Calumet evidence custodian Jeremy Hawkins and Sergeant Bill Tyson were summoned by their superiors, who pulled the strings to refocus on the murder defendant's bedroom material. Quote, both Sergeant Tyson and I checked the mattress for any red in color stains on the mattress. The mattress was also checked with ultraviolet light for any stains on the mattress. Gross. Presumptive stains were collected and tested. All presumptives on the mattress were negative, unquote, Hawkins said. Nothing of note was found on the headboard either. Then, 3 hours later, for reasons that were never explained in the police reports, Tyson and Hawkins were now being dispatched to the Chilton storage units, the facility housing the RAV-4 that was already analyzed by the state crime lab. But unlike before, the victim's auto was back under the watchful eye of Kratz, Calumet, and Manitowoc counties. Theoretically, it was now far easier to perpetrate evidence tampering. So just hours after an inspection upon the bed mattress found no signs of a bloody attack, as Sweaty Sweat had already declared to the world as fact, Tyson and Hawkins were given new marching orders. Quote, at 7:25 p.m., Sergeant Tyson and I went to the storage units located at Ann and Frontier Streets. We went to the storage unit 7, where the victim Teresa Halbach's RAV-4 was located, unquote. Had the time arrived for another improper evidence harvest? Hawkins had specific instructions to start taking DNA swabs inside the car that drew the preoccupation of Fassbender and Wiegert during their interrogation of Brendan. Quote, at approximately 7:41 p.m., I took a photograph of the hood latch of the Toyota RAV-4. At approximately 7:45 p.m., I took a photograph of the left battery cable. At approximately 7:47 p.m., I took a photograph of the right side battery cable. After I photographed the right and left battery cable and hood latch, and Sergeant Tyson took DNA swabs of these locations, the storage unit containing the Toyota RAV-4 was secured. Wow, they took pictures. Preposterous. Unlike the Hawkins report, Sergeant Tyson made sure to include a noteworthy observation that called into question Prosecutor Sweaty Sweat's wild tale about Teresa supposedly being shackled. I just saw it say interrupted again, and it's like for a split second. Hello, Nana. Nana. Quote, it shall be noted that when we analyzed the headboard, we could not see any striations around the spindles of the headboard consistent with that of having handcuffs or leg irons secured to the spindles of the headboard, unquote. When it came time to remove Avery's bed mattress and place it in the evidence training room around 4:30 p.m., quote, Deputy Hawkins and myself did look at the mattress and did observe numerous stains on the mattress. Gross. Deputy Hawkins did numerous presumptive tests on those stains, all of which turned up negative for the presence of blood. The mattress was then returned to the evidence room, unquote. From there, Sergeant Tyson called his boss, quote, I did place a telephone call to Investigator Wiegert and did inform him of our findings, unquote. 3 hours would pass. Wiegert and Fassbender had put their heads together and would have remembered how they were present when the extra pair of unnecessary groin swabs was taken from Avery's body by Manitowoc nurse Faye Fritsch back on November 9, 2005. These were the swabs Avery said he saw Wiegert pretend to put into the garbage can, but apparently didn't. Had the time finally come to deploy one of these extra Avery DNA specimens? Quote, Investigator Wiegert and Special Agent Tom Fassbender had informed us they wished for us to do DNA swabs on the interior and exterior of the door handles of Teresa Halbach's vehicle. They also requested DNA swabs done on the hood latch as well as battery cables for the vehicle, unquote, Tyson said. Tyson faithfully carried out the assignment at the storage shed in Chilton. Quote, After the DNA swabs had been collected, the door to the storage locker was secured. Deputy Hawkins and I transported the swabs that were collected to the Sheriff's Department, and the swabs were secured in the Calumet County Sheriff's Office evidence room, unquote. But it was not for long. Out of nowhere, 6 months after the car was processed in Madison, Wiegert decided the extra DNA samples were suddenly important to the case. Rather than have the items placed into a sealed FedEx container, as is customary for many police agencies, Wiegert assigned himself to personally drive the DNA samples to Madison. He appeared to want to do this alone without any interference or witnesses. The records seem to reflect he did not want anybody else looking over his shoulder. By April 2006, Wiegert's behavior was becoming more bizarre and cryptic. It was as if he were becoming paranoid and obsessive about all of Avery's DNA samples. Wiegert, the head of the investigation, even authored a strange police report that has no date on it. And yet Wiegert made a point to send a copy of the memo to his friend and longtime professional colleague, Sweaty Sweat Sweat. Quote, I had spoken with Detective Remacher in the middle part of April, unquote, Wiegert said. Quote, my reason for speaking with Detective Remacher was to request his assistance in determining whether they had any DNA samples, including, but not limited to, buccal swabs and or blood samples in their custody from Stephen Avery. It should be noted on May 4, 2006, I did receive a copy of Detective Remacher's report detailing any type of DNA evidence which they have no file, unquote. Most people forget, or perhaps they don't realize, but when Avery was arrested by Wiegert and Fassbender on November 9, 2005, his private criminal defense lawyers, Dean Strang and Jerry Buting, were not yet in the picture. It was not until February 2006, the 4th month of Avery's murder prosecution, that Avery severed ties with the Manitowoc County Public Defender's Office as his legal representation. The Wisconsin Department of Justice and the Manitowoc County Sheriff's Office personnel were surely alarmed and intimidated by the announcement of the new legal team coming on board to represent Avery. After all, Avery continued to insist over and over that he was being framed and had nothing to do with Teresa's death. If the RAV4 was strategically put onto Avery's property to ensure his arrest, and if the spare ignition was strategically dropped onto Avery's bedroom floor on the 6th day of the investigation by a member of the Manitowoc County Sheriff's Department, you have to step back and ask yourself the following question. Would it be more likely or less likely that the police leading the investigation had another bag of tricks in mind? The RAV4 was under the control of Wiegert, who put the car into a local police impound lot where he and his cohorts had easy access. Wiegert, of course, had easy access to the evidence trove taken from the Avery property, as well as to the numerous samples of DNA collected from the bedroom and bathroom of Teresa. The day after Teresa's RAV4 was found, Wiegert tasked Deputy Craig Wendling with going over to Halbach's house. Quote, Investigator Wiegert wanted me to pick up evidence that would contain Teresa Halbach's DNA in case it would be needed for further identification. Investigator Wiegert told me a toothbrush, lip chapstick, and possibly a vibrator that was located in a dresser would be good items to collect. Unquote. Sure enough, all the objects Wiegert had vividly remembered as being inside of Teresa's place, video is interrupted again, were all still there. Quote, I did find Teresa's toothbrush and some chapstick. Those items were placed into a plastic bag and sealed, unquote. The deputy also collected, quote, another lip moisturizer that had some hair stuck to it and a hairbrush, unquote. And then, in Teresa's first floor bedroom, the deputy carrying out Wiegert's tasks found a cardboard box, quote, containing a reddish maroon case with a zipper. Once I opened that case, I did locate a vibrator or a sexual device. I re-zipped the case, placed it into a plastic bag, and sealed it. Investigator Wiegert was notified that the items were obtained and placed into evidence." Unquote. Wiegert, of course, was present when the highly questionable 2 extra DNA samples were collected from Avery, groin swabs that were not necessary, a prisoner who was supposedly being taken into custody on a gun charge, not a first-degree murder charge. If you believe these cops were crooked and hell-bent on putting Avery in prison to never to come out alive, you have to realize it would only be logical that they would carry out additional dirty tricks in a win-at-all-costs mentality, now that Avery had hired Strang and Buting to attempt to prove his innocence. On the other hand, it's also possible that some of these cops had overestimated the strength and power of Buting and Strang. Going on to Chapter 20, Garage. I'm going to read this chapter. While I'm reading this, let me know if it's the still constant breaking up. And so if the video is constantly screwing up, maybe I will just end today after this chapter, and next week when we go live again next Monday, maybe we'll have better luck. That I'm just having awful internet service or whatever today. All right, Chapter 20, Garage. Because timing is everything, about a week after Strang and Buting joined the case and championed Avery's defense, people who worked at the Manitowoc County and Calumet County Sheriff's offices came to a not-so-surprising decision. Sure enough, a follow-up search was needed to go back through Avery's garage. Why? There was a feeling in the air that this follow-up garage search, just like the search of Avery's tiny bedroom when the spare key emerged, would not be a failure. The following line of questioning was posed by Strang to Remacher during Avery's murder trial. Quote, "The search of the garage on November 6th. I think that's the first time you actually searched the garage rather than simply sweeping through it to look for Ms. Halbach?" Correct. "You folks found some empty shell casings. Looked like .22 caliber rounds?" "Yes, I think 11. "Were you looking for bullets?" "We were looking for everything." "Found no bullets in the search on November 6th of the garage?" Correct. "Found no bullets any other time in Stephen Avery's garage, any time in November of 2005? Correct. "It was March 2, 2006, and you were present when bullets or bullet fragments were found in that garage?" "On March 2, yes, 1 bullet fragment." "1 bullet fragment?" "Yes." During Length's testimony, Strang asked the following questions. Had Stephen Avery actually been sitting there during your deposition? "He came in after I started giving my deposition, yes, sir." "And without you telling Mr. Fassbender and Mr. Wiegert, Sheriff Poggle knew, or Sheriff Poggle, about the deposition, there's really no way they would have known about it, would they have?" "No, sir." "So that's not information they would consider in deciding whether to accept your offer to volunteer to search for Mr. Avery's trailer?" "They didn't have that information, sir." "Because you didn't give it to them?" "No, sir, I did not." "And before you went rummaging through Stephen Avery's bedroom once, twice, 3 times, whatever it was, for hours, would it have been fairer to Stephen Avery if someone other than a person who had been deposed in his lawsuit had done that search?" "No, sir, I don't think it would have been." "You came back to Mr. Avery's 4 months later? Not quite 4 months later?" "Yes." "March 1st and March 2nd of 2006? "That's correct, sir." "Much smaller search this time, wasn't it?" "Yes, sir. I believe it was just the garage." "A search was going on in the garage?" "That's correct." "You came back?" "Yes, sir." "Did you participate in that search?" "No, sir, I did not." "Why were you back?" "I came back to see if they needed any food, any assistance with supplies, see if I could help out. I believe I was there both days. I'm not sure." unquote. During the trial, Calumet County investigator Gary Steyer testified he, too, had a critical role in the recovery of the mysterious bullet fragments that turned up in Avery's garage. Quote, Day 5 of the search warrant, a bullet fragment was located. The item was located by Agent Hemerl and was collected by myself, unquote, Steyer told the court. Quote, Day 2 of the search warrant, a second bullet fragment was also located by Agent Hemerl and was collected by Detective Remacher, unquote. At the trial, Sweaty Sweat Sweat represented to the jury that the bullet fragments found in the March 2006 garage search were indeed bullet fragments that passed through Teresa's skull. Fast forward the case a decade. On May 23, 2017, Christopher Palahniuk of Microtrace, the company's senior research microscopist, began his analysis upon the questionable bullet fragments used to convict Avery. Microtrace formed in 1992, specializing in the identification of tiny unknown substances and small particles through chemistry, geology, biology, and materials science. The company became intimately involved in some of the world's most high-profile crimes and disasters, including the Unabomber, from here, Oklahoma City bombing, the Green River serial murders, John Benet Ramsey case, Atlanta child murders, the Ivan the Terrible war crimes trial in Jerusalem, and the murder of DEA Special Agent Kiki Camarena in Mexico. Now Microtrace had gotten involved in the Avery case. But first, before conducting any full-blown scientific experiments relative to Teresa's murder trial, 4 exemplar bullets were fired through bone at the Microtrace laboratory by Lucian Haig, who has authored more than 200 scientific papers dealing with ballistics. Haig's expertise involves reconstructing shooting scenes and shooting incidents. So here's a picture of both of those guys. Haig's 4 test bullets all displayed, quote, white translucent particles consistent with the appearance of bone on the surface of or embedded in each of the 4 exemplar bullets, unquote. At that point, the test bullets were packaged and sent to the Independent Forensic Laboratory in Lombard, Illinois. That's where I'm from. Where Supervisor Liz Kopitke put the 4 damaged bullets into separate test tubes. She submerged them into what's known as a buffer fluid. Quote, Ms. Kopitke then shook the test tubes in her hand. The post-extraction exemplar bullets were again examined and photo documented. This examination showed that white translucent particles, morphologically consistent with bone, remained on and embedded in each of the 4 exemplar bullets, unquote. In other words, the DNA extraction performed by Independent Forensic Laboratory, quote, did not cause the white translucent particles consistent with bone to fall or become dislodged from the exemplar bullet, unquote. It was now time for the big moment, May 23, 2017. The Avery case bullet, known as evidence tag number FL, was hand-delivered to Microtrace in Elgin, Illinois, by Wisconsin DOJ Special Agent Jeff Wish. After analyzing this bullet under one of the most high-powered microscopes available, Palahniuk made the following determinations. Quote, there is no evidence to indicate that the bullet passed through bone. In fact, the particulate evidence that is present strongly suggests an alternate hypothesis, which is that the trajectory of the fired bullet took it into a wooden object, possibly a manufactured wood product. Furthermore, the presence of red droplets deposited on the bullet suggests that the bullet had picked up additional contamination from its environment at some point after coming to a rest. Based upon these findings, it is our understanding that an investigator was sent by the Zellner Law Office to the Avery garage to review the area for possible sources of the particulate types described above, unquote. According to Microtrace, 2 possible sources were recovered around Avery's property. One was particle board in the garage with apparent bullet holes and red painted surfaces, including the red painted garage. The other was a ladder in the condemned man's garage. Quote, each of the above listed materials observed on the bullet could be identified specifically if their actual identity is of importance to the investigation. This may provide further constraints or refinement of the hypothesis I've advanced, unquote, Palahniuk said. Additionally, the law firm of Kathleen Zellner and Associates sought out the expertise of Dr. Luke Haig, a distinguished independent forensic consultant who owns Forensic Science Services, Inc. in Carefree, Arizona. Haig has been utilized as an expert witness on firearms identification and firearms evidence across the country. Quote, the damaged bullet recovered from Stephen Avery's garage and purported to yield a full DNA profile of Teresa Halbach shows no evidence of having been shot through Ms. Halbach's skull, unquote, Haig said. Quote, the bullet, which was identified as a .22 long rifle bullet, was comprised of such soft metal that there would be detectable bone fragments embedded in the damaged bullet if it had been fired through Ms. Halbach's skull. Because no bone fragments have been identified in the damaged bullet, item FL, over the course of its examination, including DNA and firearms tools marks analysis at the Wisconsin State Crime Lab, it is my opinion to a reasonable degree of certainty in the field of ballistics that item FL was not fired through Ms. Halbach's skull, unquote. Haig further explains how he performed a rigorous battery of ballistics testing to illustrate for the court how bone fragments would become embedded with a .22 long rifle bullets when fired through human bone. Quote, I fired 2 copper-plated lead CCI Mini-Mag .22 long rifle bullets through 1 layer of approximately 2 millimeter thick flat bone and through 5 inches of soft tissue stimulant as a means of recovering the bullet. Bone particles embedded in the soft lead were readily visible under a stereo microscope, for both the bullets fired through 1 thickness of bone had 2 thicknesses of bone, unquote. Back at Avery's trial, William Newhouse of the Wisconsin State Crime Lab, a firearms examiner, testified as a prosecution witness used by Sweaty Sweat Sweat. Quote, according to Mr. Newhouse's bullet worksheet, Mr. Newhouse identified no trace evidence on the damaged bullet. If there were bone fragments embedded in the damaged bullet, I would expect a reasonably competent firearms examiner to have identified them during this microscopical examination, unquote, Haig said. Quote, because Mr. Newhouse did not note or describe any bone or bone-like particles embedded in item FL during his microscopical examination of this damaged bullet, it is my opinion, to a reasonable degree of certainty in the field of forensic bullets, that item FL was not fired through Teresa Halbach's skull, unquote. Haig's biography notes he is a former criminalist and technical director of the Phoenix Crime Laboratory with more than 50 years of experience in the field, as well as having done forensic firearms examinations. He authored the first edition book called Shooting Incident Reconstruction. Haig was born in 1940 in Springfield, Illinois. Because Avery's jury trial was heralded as Wisconsin's biggest trial since serial killer cannibal Jeffrey Dahmer, it made perfect sense for a sly and unsavory prosecutor to represent wild assertions and stories as fact. Most people around the country fail to understand that court trials, notably murder trials, often don't get to the heart of the actual truth, but are often more about the theatrics and drama. The actors, the winners, and the losers are the lawyers. It's about presentation. It's about style. It's about pizzazz. Sweaty Sweat Sweat recognized this, and he excelled at it. I beg to differ. Around the time of Avery's trial, Sweaty Sweat Sweat also had a cozy relationship with several members of the Wisconsin press. They were not about to question him about how he came up with his wild stories of Teresa's murder. For them, he was a reliable and trustworthy source for their story tips, even though he was one of the most untrustworthy public office holders in northeastern Wisconsin. Quote, at trial, it was claimed that the defendant's DNA on the listed item of evidence was deposited from sweaty fingers. This is, of course, pure speculation, as there is no forensic test for the presence of sweat. Nonetheless, the DNA that generated the profile came from somewhere, unquote, Zellner said. Enter Dr. Carl Reich. He was enlisted to conduct a series of fact-finding experiments surrounding the mysterious so-called Hoodlatch DNA specimen. That item was the late-to-the-game damning piece of DNA evidence used by the special prosecutor to stick the nail in the coffin at Avery's murder trial. Dr. Reich runs independent forensics in Lombard, Illinois. His company in DuPage County, that's where I am, focuses on forensic DNA, molecular biology, protein biochemistry, microbial and human functional genomics, and protein purification. A highly distinguished scientist, Dr. Reich has 8 years of postgraduate and 15 years of experience in the pharmaceutical and biotechnology industries. The chief scientific officer at Independent Forensics since 2002, Reich is a court-qualified expert witness on forensic DNA, forensic biology, and forensic biology and statistics. As of June 2017, Dr. Reich had given court testimony and sworn pretrial depositions in more than 80 cases in state, federal, and international courts for both civil and criminal matters. Oh, my back hurts. Now he needed to determine, once and for all, was the infamous Hoodlatch DNA specimen used to convict Avery legitimate? Quote, volunteers were enlisted to open the car hood of this surrogate vehicle using the engine compartment hood latch, the current and identical method used by the Wisconsin State Forensic DNA Laboratory, Madison, unquote, Reich said. Quote, this experimental test was repeated 15 times. The hood latch was, of course, cleaned after each round of hood opening and subsequent swabbing, unquote. Here were his results. Quote, in 11 of the 15 replicates, no detectable DNA was recovered from the hood latch. In other words, in almost 3/4 of the hood opening trials, no measurable DNA was left behind by the individual who opened the hood. Put another way, even when DNA was left on the hood latch after opening the hood, the amount of DNA recovered was between 20 and 35 times less than that recovered from the item identified as MO5-2467. To put it yet another way, the Madison laboratory recovered from 6 to 7 times more DNA than all of the DNA recovered from all of the 15 hood openings combined, unquote. But how could such a phenomenon occur? Quote, given the experimental results, both the body fluid detection data and the DNA recovery data from the hood latch opening trials, the question of what sample MO5-2467 ID might be becomes a subject for investigation, unquote, Dr. Reich said. And there's a picture of Dr. Reich. In addition to scrutinizing the dubious hoodlatch DNA sample, Reich also performed a similar experiment related to the highly questionable spare key. This was the key that surfaced on Avery's bedroom carpet, recovered by Lincoln Colborn. to give Manitowoc County its lone item of evidence to tie Teresa's disappearance to the inside of Avery's trailer. Quote, similar to the experimental work to replicate the hood latch results, an experiment was done to try to replicate the results from the ignition key of the victim's automobile. An exemplar key, reportedly held by Mr. Avery as if to start a car, gripped by ungloved fingers for 12 minutes, was subject to DNA quantification. It was determined that 0.017 nanograms per microliter was recovered. This result was 10 times less DNA than reported by the Wisconsin Department of Justice State Crime Laboratory Madison on the key they analyzed, item M055-2467 number C, unquote. In both instances, Dr. Reich found the DNA experiments quite startling. Quote, an order of magnitude difference is a significant finding, unquote, he said. Regarding the supposed hood latch DNA, Dr. Reich opined, quote, it is an oft-repeated fear heard from many defendants that the evidence in their case has been enhanced, manufactured, or otherwise manipulated to their disadvantage. There is no doubt that evidence tampering occurs, though there is little to support the contention that this is a widespread practice, unquote. But why would some lawmen, people such as Wiegert, Fassbender, Colborn, Lenk, and possibly others, become tempted to take matters into their own hands? Quote, it is often assumed that creating an item of evidence de novo or enhancing an item of evidence is an effective method of evidence tampering. However, simply relabeling an errant known standard reference swab as a questioned item exhibit accomplishes the goal of identifying the defendant far more efficiently. There is sufficient evidence to hypothesize that this approach to evidence tampering occurred for sample M05-2467 number ID, which was the hood latch swab, unquote, Dr. Reich said. When Avery went on trial, his lawyers portrayed Colborn and Lenk as the prime evidence planters. Attorney Zellner's research does not completely abandon Lenk and Colborn as being intimately involved in planting evidence, but her investigators strongly suspect Fassbender and Wiegert were involved in facilitating some of the extraordinary evidence harvests. If you go back and study the many questionable evidence finds, they often happen after Wiegert and Fassbender give one of their underlings a specific assignment or task that comes at an odd or strange time in the case. In Omaha, Nebraska, and we're not reading that, of his other case. Although most people believe the spare key found on Avery's bedroom carpet was put there by Lenk and Colborn, Avery's original trial lawyers never developed a strong theory to explain why their client's DNA was on that key. Strang and Buting also could have devoted more research into the hood latch DNA swab touted by Kratz. Even though they knew the evidence was likely phony, Strang and Buting did not have a strong argument or an expert witness to refute this damning piece of unorthodox forensic evidence when it came time for their client's trial. The lawyers for Avery also didn't spend enough time following up on the two highly irregular groin swabs Wiegert and Fassbender collected from their client at the time of his arrest when Avery was just being arrested on a weapons violation charge. According to Dr. Reich, quote, the chain of custody and disposition of two groin swabs taken from the defendant during his arrest is neither complete, accurate, nor transparent. Such a sample, relabeled as taken from the hood latch of the victim's vehicle, would satisfy all of the observed facts: lack of body fluid, sufficient amount of DNA for a profile, and would link the defendant to the victim without all of the messy and complicated effort to actually deposit DNA on a grease and engine grimed engine compartment metal latch. But this hypothesis is a better fit to the data. Experimental trials and needs of the investigators for clear and convincing evidence of a link between the defendant and the victim's vehicle. A swab truly taken from the engine compartment hood latch should have been covered in black engine grime and grease, as anyone who has ever had to open the hood of a high-mileage car can attest. The swab batting in question was merely very lightly discolored, another fact that does not fit with the claimed origin of this sample." Unquote. Another major event in Avery's prosecution occurred on the 1st and 2nd of March 2006, when the Manitowoc and Calumet County deputies returned back to the Avery property. Sweaty Sweat Sweat called it the, quote, "thorough search," unquote, of Avery's detached garage. But the search warrant also afforded police another opportunity to wander back inside Avery's bedroom. Calumet Deputy Rick Reamer, working closely with investigator Wendy Baldwin, also confiscated evidence item 8359, which was, quote, "a left foot slipper near the east wall in the south bedroom," unquote, and item 8360, quote, "a right foot slipper," unquote. But why, 4 months into the murder case, were authorities all of a sudden removing Avery's slippers from his bedroom? Dr. Reich wanted to examine whether the police were attempting to extract DNA from Avery's slippers to have it handy against the despised murder defendant. Quote, "Our lab conducted an experiment to examine whether the bedroom slippers recovered from Mr. Avery's residence could have been the source of his DNA detected on the Toyota ignition key M05-2467 number C, allegedly recovered from Mr. Avery's bedroom. This hypothesis was tested by creating a pair of worn slippers, sockless, 9 hours a day for 5 days, and using this worn item as a source of DNA on an exemplar ignition key. The procedure was to prepare the slippers, rub the key, and then measure the DNA that was transferred. This approach yielded 0.0393 nanograms per microliter, well below the concentration of DNA reported by the Wisconsin Department of Justice State Crime Laboratory Madison for the key they analyzed at 0.17 nanograms per microliter. These data do not support the hypothesis that the DNA identified on the Toyota ignition key came from contact with the slippers photographed in and recovered from Mr. Avery's bedroom. If the Toyota ignition key was indeed enhanced, then it is likely that some other personal item of Mr. Avery's was used for this purpose. Some possible examples might include a toothbrush or a cigarette butt," unquote. Of course, simple logic dictates that if Wiegert and Fassbender gathered up 2 perfect DNA samples from Avery's groin and they were holding on to them for devious purposes, one groin swab may have been substituted as the hood latch DNA specimen. The other likely got used for the spare key DNA sample. Quote, "It is hypothesized that a rubbed groin swab taken from the defendant was relabeled and thus became evidence from a hood latch," unquote, Reich said. Quote, "This hypothesis has not been proven, but it fully explains all of the known facts regarding this item. Taken in context with other facts and allegations in the case of Wisconsin versus Avery, this hypothesis deserves careful consideration from the trier of fact." And that's where we're going to end today, because I'm not going to keep reading if we're going to constantly have where it's freezing the video. So when we go live on Monday, we will be starting on chapter 20, and there it just flashed again. Chapter 21, Heroes and Goats. It is page 213 of 361. So we're calling it quits for today because it's driving me nuts seeing that constant, that it's, So, like I said, I may go live tomorrow. on the Stephen Avery Project public page. Hopefully, knock on wood, I'll have better internet. I don't know what the deal is with that. Um, but if I decide I am going to do that, Christopher will get an event made and share it with you all. So if not, next time we're live will be Monday. I know, Cat, right? Damn internet. So I'm planning on Monday and Wednesday next week at 1 p.m. Central if I need both days to finish. Yeah, I'll need both days to finish. Live video interrupted again. All right. I'm out of here before I punch this stuff. Investigation continues.